Hello everyone, and welcome to the 16th video in the series of research methodology titled Ethics of Research. I am absolutely thrilled to have you here today because we're focusing on the topic that really forms the very soul of scientific inquiry. Okay, let's dive right into this. When you hear the word research, what pops into your head? You might just picture scientists holding test tubes in a sterile lab, right? Or maybe some folks staring at endless lines of code, or gathering massive amounts of survey data and plotting out complex charts. But beneath all the data and the methodology, at its absolute core, research is a profound moral responsibility. The way we go about collecting our data, how we treat the real living people who participate in our studies, and how we ultimately interpret and put our findings out into the world, all of that carries a massive, massive ethical weight. We aren't merely out here producing knowledge just for knowledge's sake. We're operating within a very strict framework, one that demands our absolute respect for human dignity, for animal welfare, and for the environment as a whole.
To help guide us through all of this, we've got a really clear agenda for today's explainer. We're going to cover the fundamental need for ethics, then look at respect and autonomy, balancing risks, fairness, privacy, and integrity, and finally, our broader responsibility to society. So, let's get right to it. Section 1. The need for research ethics and its historical context. So, we have to start by acknowledging something quite heavy. The modern ethical standards we rely on today, they weren't just brainstormed in a vacuum by some committee on a random Tuesday. They were forged out of horrific historical tragedies. They were very dark times when the pursuit of scientific goals was actually used to justify the gross violation of basic human rights. Back in 1949, following the unthinkable horrors of the Nazi medical experiments during the Second World War, the Nuremberg Code was established. This was a massive landmark moment. It fundamentally declared that human beings must never, ever be treated merely as objects for experimentation, and that voluntary consent is absolutely paramount. No exceptions. Building on that foundation, the Declaration of Helsinki was created in 1964 by the World Medical Association, and this heavily emphasized the need for independent review and the strict protection of vulnerable groups. And then we arrive at 1979, when the Belmont Report was published in the United States. Now, this report was prompted by immense, entirely justified public outrage over the Tuskegee syphilis study. If you don't know about it, it was a profound tragedy where African-American men were deliberately misled and denied proper, life-saving medical treatment for decades. Why? Just so researchers could casually track the natural progression of the disease. It's heartbreaking. So the Belmont Report was an urgent intervention. It laid down central, unshakable principles to ensure that this kind of dark history could never, ever repeat itself. That brings us to Section 2, Respect, Consent, and Autonomy. This covers the first major principle established by the Belmont Report, which is respect for persons. It recognizes a fundamental, undeniable truth. Human beings are autonomous. We all have inherent dignity, and we have the absolute right to make our own decisions about whether or not we want to participate in a study. A researcher must never force, deceive, or manipulate someone into taking part, period. And the practical, everyday application of this respect is what we call informed consent. Now, it is so vital to understand that informed consent is a continuous, living communication process. It is not, let me repeat, not just a legally binding piece of paper with a signature at the bottom that you sign once and then completely forget about. Participants have to knowingly and voluntarily agree to take part, but only after they fully understand the purpose, the procedures, the risks, and the benefits of the study. And here is the truly crucial part, the part that gives them power. They must know they have the absolute right to refuse participation entirely or to walk away and withdraw at any single moment during the study without facing any penalty or pressure whatsoever. Moving on to Section 3, Balancing Risks and Minimizing Harm. This focuses on the incredibly delicate tightrope that every single researcher has to walk. Because on one side, you have this powerful, driving need to seek out new knowledge that can genuinely benefit the world. But on the exact opposite side, you have the fundamental, unyielding obligation to protect the real people who are participating in your study. This entire balancing act basically boils down to two big concepts: beneficence versus non-maleficence. Beneficence means we are actively, purposefully trying to promote welfare and maximize the real benefits of our research for society. Non-maleficence, on the other hand, means we are actively avoiding unnecessary harm. Imagine for a second you're a researcher testing a revolutionary, potentially life-saving new drug. But early trials start showing it might have some severe side effects. While it's true that not all risk can be 100% completely eliminated from research, researchers must meticulously work to minimize those risks. And we aren't just talking about physical harm here either. We have to thoroughly consider emotional distress, social stigma, legal dangers, and even economic risks to the participants. The rule of thumb: the risks must always be reasonable in relation to the expected benefits.
All right, Section 4, Fairness and Justice in Research. Justice in research demands that the burdens of research and the benefits that ultimately come from it are shared equally across society. It's simply about fundamental fairness. Historically, as we've seen, it was tragically common for researchers to exploit disadvantaged or poorer groups as research subjects. Why? Well, simply because they were accessible, they were marginalized, and they lacked legal protections to fight back. Meanwhile, the privileged wealthy groups received all the medical and scientific benefits of that research once it was completed. Talk about unfair, right? The modern ethical approach demands fair and equitable inclusion. Let's think about a concrete example to really ground this. Imagine a massive pharmaceutical company testing a new vaccine in a developing nation. Maybe regulations there are looser, and the people are incredibly desperate for care. But then, that same company only turns around and sells the finished approved vaccine in wealthy nations that can afford their high prices. That is a massive, inexcusable ethical violation. In modern global research, researchers must actively serve local needs and ensure that the benefits are shared directly with the specific community that helped generate the data in the first place.
Now, for Section 5, Privacy, Honesty, and Integrity. So we are now shifting our focus from the protection of human bodies to the handling of sensitive data. And it is incredibly important here to distinguish between two terms that often get mixed up: privacy and confidentiality. Privacy is a person's fundamental right to control access to their personal information. Confidentiality, however, is the researcher's strict professional duty to protect that information once it has been shared with them. And let me tell you, this is profoundly urgent right now. We live in a digital era absolutely filled to the brim with artificial intelligence, online surveys, and massive social media data sets. It is easier than ever to simply scrape personal data from the internet. But remember this: just because you quickly clicked "I agree" on some 50-page terms of service agreement for an app on your phone, or just because your data is technically floating around available online, does not mean a researcher has the ethical green light to manipulate or use your data however they please. No way. We have to consider ongoing consent, rock-solid data security, and the potential for real-world misuse in every single study we do. Beyond just protecting data, we have to fiercely protect the truth itself. The three cardinal sins of research are fabrication, falsification, and plagiarism. Fabrication is exactly what it sounds like: simply inventing data out of thin air to support a hypothesis. Falsification is a bit more insidious. It's manipulating, changing, or conveniently omitting specific results to create a misleading conclusion. And plagiarism, of course, is stealing someone else's hard-earned ideas or words without giving them the credit they deserve. Now, often, these sins are driven by the intense pressure cooker environment of modern academia. You might have heard of the infamous publish or perish culture. Good, well-meaning people might make terrible, unethical decisions under that kind of career stress. But make no mistake, scientific misconduct destroys public trust, it wastes precious funding and resources, and it can lead to incredibly dangerous decisions in the real world when policies or medical treatments are based on fabricated, fake data. Closely related to that idea of scientific misconduct is the concept of a conflict of interest. This occurs when a researcher has personal, financial, or institutional interests that could improperly influence their study. Think about, for example, a researcher receiving heavy corporate funding from a major fast food company to conduct a study on, say, childhood nutrition. Now, it's important to clarify something. Having a conflict isn't inherently a crime. The crime is hiding it. The conflict itself isn't necessarily the poison. The secrecy is the poison. The only ethical way to manage a conflict of interest and to maintain scientific objectivity is through complete, unvarnished transparency. Disclosing these relationships right up front, out in the open, is how we protect public trust in the research we do. Finally, Section 6, Responsibility and Broader Impacts. So, a really crucial point to make here is that our ethics absolutely must extend beyond just human subjects. Established way back in 1959, the framework known as the 3 Rs is the gold standard for animal research. Let's walk through a quick mental exercise on how this applies today. Step 1 is replacement. Thanks to amazing modern technology like advanced computer modeling or even testing on lab-grown human tissues, researchers have to stop and ask, can we completely replace the use of animals for this study? If the answer is truly no, then we move to step 2, which is reduction. This means using rigorous statistical analysis to determine the absolute minimum number of animals necessary to still get valid, scientifically sound results. And step 3 is refinement. This is about drastically improving the living conditions and the procedures to minimize any pain and distress the animals might experience. Research involving animals requires incredibly strict moral justification and profound humane care every step of the way. But remember, upholding ethics is never meant to be a solo journey. Individual researchers need serious institutional support and oversight. Institutions enforce safeguards like ethics committees, institutional review boards, strict data management policies, and plagiarism checks. Now, an institutional review board, commonly called an IRB, is not just some bureaucratic red tape meant to annoy you or slow you down. They are the absolute frontline defense for human participants. They review proposals before a single piece of data is ever collected. And here is a fascinating point we really need to slow down and absorb. Ensuring scientific validity is, in and of itself, an ethical duty enforced by these boards. Why is that? Well, because a poorly designed study, one that doesn't produce useful, valid knowledge, needlessly exposes human beings to burdens and risks for literally no reason. Bad science is, by definition, unethical science. Before we wrap up, I want to reflect on this incredibly powerful quote from the philosopher Hans Jonas from 1984. He said, "Modern technological power creates new ethical responsibilities because human actions can have long-term effects on future generations and the planet." Just let the sheer gravity of that sink in for a moment. Today, researchers are making unfathomable breakthroughs in artificial intelligence, in genetic engineering, and environmental climate hacking. These aren't just isolated experiments confined to the walls of a laboratory. They are monumental actions that will literally dictate the kind of world your children and grandchildren inherit. Our research has to be guided by a profound, far-reaching concern for long-term human welfare, for global sustainability, and for peace.
Ultimately, ethical research goes so far beyond just asking if a study can be done. It leaves us with a provocative, overarching final question that every single researcher and really every single consumer of science must ask themselves before moving forward. Should this study be done, and how can it be done responsibly? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. If you found this breakdown valuable and it got you thinking, please take a quick moment right now to like this video, leave a comment down below with your thoughts, share it with your peers, and subscribe to the channel so you never miss an update in our research methodology series. Keep asking the right questions, and I'll see you in the next one.